My name is Caleb Reynolds, 28 years old, and 2 weeks ago I watched my parents laugh in my face at my grandfather Walter's will reading. When the attorney announced my inheritance was just $1, their smug smile said everything. My father actually nudged my mother, both barely containing their amusement. I wanted to disappear into the leather chair. Then the attorney cleared his throat. Actually, there's a private letter addressed only to Caleb. The room froze. That moment changed everything. Before I dive into what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button and stick around, because you won't believe how this story unfolds. My grandfather, Walter Reynolds, was more than just a relative. He was my mentor, my confidant, and in many ways, the father figure I needed, but never had at home. Our bond began during my childhood summers spent at his estate in rural Vermont. While other kids went to summer camps, I spent 3 glorious months every year in the sprawling countryside home that Walter had built after his business took off in the 70s. Those summers formed the bedrock of our relationship. Walter would wake me at dawn to go fishing on the private lake that bordered his property. We'd sit in comfortable silence as the mist rose from the water, occasionally breaking it to talk about life, dreams, and the value of patience. "The fish come when they're ready, Caleb, not when you demand them," he'd say, a philosophy he applied to business and relationships alike. When we weren't fishing, we'd hike through the forests surrounding his property. Walter knew every tree, every trail, and every hidden spring. He taught me to recognize bird calls, to spot deer tracks, and to respect the natural world. "We don't own the land," he told me once. "We're just borrowing it from the next generation." In his workshop, Walter taught me carpentry. His hands, weathered but steady, guided mine as we built birdhouses, repaired furniture, and once, an entire canoe that we later christened on the lake. Those hours in the sawdust-filled space were when Walter shared his most important lessons. Measure twice, cut once, he'd remind me, in woodworking and in life. The contrast between these experiences and life with my parents couldn't have been starker. Arthur and Diana Reynolds lived for status, for showing off their wealth, for being seen at the right events with the right people. In their world, value was measured by square footage and bank statements. Walter built his engineering firm, Reynolds Sustainable Development, from nothing but determination and vision in 1973. He started with environmental consultation for small businesses, advocating for sustainable practices long before they became fashionable. As his reputation for integrity and innovation grew, so did his company. By the 90s, Reynolds Sustainable Development had expanded into real estate development, specializing in environmentally conscious, commercial, and residential projects. What made Walter's success remarkable was his old-school approach. He conducted business with handshakes before contracts, believed a person's word was their bond, and refused to compromise on his ethical standards even when it cost him financially. "Money comes and goes," he told me once, "but your good name, once lost, is nearly impossible to recover." My parents ran the East Coast branch of the family business, but Walter made no secret of his disappointment in their methods. They pushed for faster growth, cut corners on environmental standards when they thought they could get away with it, and prioritized profit above the company's founding principles. These differences created tension at family gatherings, though Walter, ever the gentleman, kept his criticisms private. As I grew older and entered college, my bond with Walter evolved. He supported my decision to study environmental engineering, not with mere approval, but with genuine enthusiasm. "Education is the one thing nobody can take from you," he said, helping me pay for tuition, despite my parents insisting I could work my way through to build character. During those college years, we established our Sunday morning ritual. Every week at 9 sharp, my phone would ring, and we'd talk for at least an hour. We discussed my studies, his latest projects, books we'd both read, and increasingly, deeper questions about purpose and legacy. When I graduated and announced my intention to work for a nonprofit focused on affordable, sustainable housing, rather than joining the family business, my parents were livid. Walter, however, nodded thoughtfully and said, "You've found your path. That's more than most people ever do." I visited Walter regularly through my 20s. We maintained our Sunday calls without fail, even when I was traveling for work or when he was supposedly on vacation. Sometimes I'd surprise him by showing up at his office on a random Tuesday with lunch, and his face would light up with genuine joy at seeing me. The diagnosis came without warning. Aggressive pancreatic cancer, stage 4, 6 months at best, the doctors said. Walter received this news with the same calm dignity with which he'd faced every challenge in his life. "We all have an expiration date, Caleb," he told me. "I've just been given the courtesy of knowing mine." I immediately rearranged my work schedule to visit 3 times weekly. We spent hours talking, playing chess, or simply sitting together watching the sunset from his favorite porch swing. Sometimes he'd mention cryptic things about setting things right or people showing their true colors, but when I pressed for details, he'd change the subject. My parents visited sporadically, always with excuses about business commitments or social obligations. When they did come, they spoke more about the company's future than Walter's comfort. I'd catch Walter watching them with a distant look that I couldn't quite decipher. In his final days, when morphine clouded his thoughts, Walter had moments of startling clarity. During one such moment, he gripped my hand with surprising strength and pulled me close. "Remember what matters," he whispered. "Not things, not status, people, truth, how you make others feel." 3 days later, he was gone. The family gathered, appropriate tears were shed, and arrangements were made. Through it all, I moved in a fog of genuine grief while watching my relatives perform theirs. None of us knew then what Walter had set in motion before he died. My relationship with my parents had been strained for as long as I could remember. Arthur and Diana Reynolds presented a perfect family image to the world: successful, attractive, philanthropic when cameras were present. Behind closed doors, they were critical, distant, and perpetually disappointed in me. My father, with his perfectly tailored suits and practiced firm handshake, never missed an opportunity to remind me of my wasted potential. During a particularly tense Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago, he'd raised his glass in a mock toast. To Caleb, who could have been running a division of Reynolds by now, but instead chooses to build tiny houses for the unfortunate. "Your idealism is adorable, son." My mother was subtler but equally cutting. "Darling," she'd say, touching my cheek in that theatrical way she had, "you know, we just want what's best for you. Don't you think it's time to put away these little projects and start building real wealth? You're not getting any younger." Their criticisms grew more pronounced after Walter's diagnosis. They barely visited him despite living only an hour away, always with the same rehearsed excuses: board meetings that couldn't be rescheduled, charity galas they'd committed to months ago, business trips that suddenly became essential. Yet they found time for weekend getaways to their house in the Hamptons and spontaneous trips to Paris for Mother's birthday. As I spent more time at Walter's bedside, their insinuations became increasingly transparent. "You're certainly putting in the hours," my father commented after running into me at Walter's house. "Smart move. The old man appreciates loyalty." The implication was clear. I was performing devotion for inheritance. My mother was even less subtle. "Walter always had a soft spot for you," she said, during one of her rare visits, glancing around at the antique furniture and valuable art pieces. "I'm sure he'll remember that when the time comes." These comments cut deep because they revealed how little my parents understood me or my relationship with Walter. I didn't care about his money or possessions. I cared about the man who taught me to fish, to build, to think beyond myself. The sad truth was that their behavior wasn't new. Throughout my childhood, they'd wielded approval like a weapon. Good grades were expected, not celebrated. Achievements were acknowledged with terse nods and immediate questions about what came next. Emotional needs were dismissed as weakness. I'd spent years trying to earn love that should have been freely given. As Walter's illness progressed, the rest of the family began their own performance of devotion. Uncle Robert and Aunt Melissa, who had visited maybe twice a year before the diagnosis, suddenly appeared weekly with casseroles and concerned expressions. Uncle Robert, my father's younger brother, shared his business sense but none of Walter's integrity. He'd been involved in several questionable deals that Walter had needed to clean up over the years. Aunt Melissa, a former model who had married into the family 20 years ago, had always coveted Walter's art collection. She'd make a point of commenting on specific pieces during her visits. "This Wyeth really speaks to me," she'd say, standing before it with manufactured reverence. "It captures something essential about the American spirit, don't you think?" My cousins Marcus and Brittany joined this parade of sudden interest. Marcus, Uncle Robert's son, would corner Walter to discuss investment strategies, casually mentioning his new hedge fund that was perfect for someone looking to diversify their holdings. Brittany, a social media entrepreneur with a lifestyle brand built on performative authenticity, began featuring cryptic posts about precious time with family featuring Walter's estate as a backdrop. Family dinners during this period became excruciating exercises in subtle competition. Achievements were casually dropped into conversation. Career advancements were mentioned with false modesty. Designer outfits and luxury watches were displayed without explicit comment. Everyone was positioning, presenting themselves as successful stewards of Walter's legacy. I once overheard a conversation between my father and Uncle Robert when they thought they were alone on the patio. The Vermont property would make an excellent corporate retreat, my father said. We could write it off as a business expense. I'm more interested in the art, Uncle Robert replied. Melissa has already contacted her appraiser friend about the collection's value. Walter's not even gone yet, I interrupted, unable to contain my disgust. They had the decency to look embarrassed, but not for long. Just planning ahead, my father said smoothly. Walter would appreciate our foresight. Against this backdrop of family politics, my own life continued. I lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a diverse neighborhood I'd fallen in love with. My work at Sustainable Housing Solutions allowed me to design affordable, environmentally friendly homes for families who would otherwise be priced out of the market. My team was passionate, committed, and refreshingly genuine. My closest friends, Simon and Rachel, had been supportive throughout Walter's illness. They took turns accompanying me to the hospital on difficult days, brought food when I was too exhausted to cook, and provided space for me to express grief without judgment. Simon even took over my ongoing projects during the final weeks so I could spend more time with Walter. As I moved between these two worlds, my family's realm of calculation and competition, and my own life built on meaning and connection, the contrast became increasingly stark. I realized that somewhere along the way, I had stopped seeking my parents' approval and started building a life that would make Walter proud instead. The week before the will reading, my parents hosted a family gathering at their mansion in Greenwich. Ostensibly to honor Walter's memory, it functioned more as a strategy session disguised as reminiscence. The house, with its marble foyer and sweeping staircase, felt cold despite the summer heat. My mother cornered me by the bar, champagne flute in hand. "Caleb, darling," she began, her voice honeyed. "Your father and I have been talking. If Walter has been generous with you, and we expect he has, we'd be happy to help you manage whatever comes your way. Investments can be so complicated for someone without experience." Later, my father gathered everyone for a toast. "To Walter," he said, raising an expensive whiskey that Walter would have found ostentatious. "A man who built an empire, and whose generosity, I'm certain, will reflect the love we all showed him." I excused myself early and drove to Walter's empty house. The caretakers let me in without question. I wandered to his study, a room that smelled of leather and the pipe tobacco he'd given up years ago but whose scent had permanently infused the wood paneling. I sat in his chair, opened his desk drawer, and found the photo albums he kept there. Pictures of us fishing, building, laughing. No posed family portraits or business award ceremonies. Just genuine moments of connection. "I miss you," I said to the empty room, unashamed of the tears that followed. "And I don't know how to face them without you." The will reading was scheduled for 10 in the morning at the offices of Hamilton, Burr, and Associates, Walter's longtime legal counsel. The firm occupied 3 floors of a glass and steel building in downtown Boston, the kind of place where the elevator moved in silent efficiency and every surface gleamed with prosperity. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in my best Navy suit, nothing fancy, but clean and appropriate. In the elevator, I encountered my cousin Brittany, who gave me a quick once-over before offering a practiced, sympathetic smile. "How are you holding up?" she asked, not waiting for an answer. "This is so hard for all of us. Grandfather was such a special man." She had never called Walter grandfather while he was alive. It had always been Grandpa Walter or just Walter. This subtle rebranding struck me as calculated, another performance for an audience that now included legal witnesses. The conference room was intimidating in its understated luxury. Dark wood table, butter-soft leather chairs, walls lined with law books that looked both used and valuable. Family members arranged themselves strategically. My parents took positions near the head of the table, where Lawrence Hamilton, Walter's attorney, would sit. Uncle Robert and Aunt Melissa chose seats directly across, while my cousins filled in the remaining premium spots. I found myself near the far end, beside George and Maria, the couple who had maintained Walter's estate for over 20 years. They nodded warmly at me, their genuine grief evident in their red-rimmed eyes. My father glanced at my position with a satisfied smirk that seemed to say, "Know your place." My mother didn't look my way at all, too busy adjusting her black designer dress and dabbing at eyes that remained perfectly made up. Lawrence Hamilton entered precisely at 10, accompanied by 2 younger associates carrying folders. Hamilton had the distinguished look of old Boston money, silver hair, tortoiseshell glasses, and a suit that cost more than my car, but was designed to appear modest. He had been Walter's attorney for 30 years and his friend for nearly as long. "Good morning," he began, his voice carrying natural authority. "We're gathered to execute the last will and testament of Walter James Reynolds. Before we begin, I want to express my personal condolences. Walter was not just a client, but a dear friend." He opened a leather portfolio and began with the formal legal preamble, stating that Walter had been of sound mind when the will was updated 3 months prior. This detail caused a subtle shift in the room. 3 months ago, Walter had already been diagnosed. He had made these decisions knowing exactly what was coming. Hamilton first addressed the bequests to the household staff. Maria and George were granted lifetime residence in the caretaker's cottage on the Vermont property, along with an annual stipend that made my mother's eyebrows rise. Walter's personal assistant received a generous lump sum, as did his driver and the weekly housekeeper. "Quite generous to the help," my father murmured to my mother, just loud enough to be heard. Maria's spine stiffened, but she said nothing. Hamilton continued with smaller personal bequests. Walter's fishing gear to his Thursday poker buddy, his collection of first-edition Hemingway novels to his college roommate, his vintage Rolex to Lawrence himself, a personal gift that brought a rare display of emotion to the attorney's professional demeanor. The tension in the room grew as these minor items were dispensed with. The substantial assets, the properties, the company shares, the investment accounts, remained unaddressed. My father began drumming his fingers on the table until my mother placed her hand over his to stop the nervous tell. "Now, to the distribution of major assets," Hamilton said, adjusting his glasses. "To Robert Reynolds and Melissa Reynolds, Walter leaves his vacation properties in Aspen and Naples, along with the sum of $2 million. Uncle Robert nodded, as if this was exactly what he had expected. Aunt Melissa smiled tightly, disappointed about the art collection that hadn't been mentioned. To Brittany Reynolds, Walter leaves his art collection, with the stipulation that key pieces be donated to the Boston Museum of Fine Arts upon her death. Aunt Melissa's smile vanished entirely. Brittany straightened in her chair, suddenly important. To Marcus Reynolds, Walter leaves his collection of vintage automobiles and a trust fund of $3 million to be dispersed in annual payments, contingent upon Marcus's continued employment in socially responsible investment firms. Marcus frowned at the condition but quickly masked it with a solemn nod. To Arthur and Diana Reynolds, Hamilton continued, looking at my parents, Walter leaves his secondary business holdings in Reynolds' East Coast operations, his stock portfolio excluding Reynolds' Sustainable Development shares, and liquid assets in the amount of $15 million. My father's shoulders relaxed visibly. My mother's hand flew to her pearl necklace, a gesture of relief. They exchanged a satisfied glance, their inheritance apparently meeting expectations. Then Hamilton's eyes found mine, his expression unreadable. To my grandson, Caleb Reynolds, he read, "I leave the sum of $1. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds before my father made a sound, something between a cough and a snort. My mother's giggle followed, high and nervous. Then came the whispers, the sideways glances, the poorly concealed smirks. Teacher's pet got schooled. Marcus stage whispered to Brittany, loud enough for everyone to hear. "All that bedside devotion for $1, my father added, not bothering to lower his voice. Hamilton placed a single dollar bill on the table in front of me. I stared at it, my face burning with humiliation. The room seemed to spin slightly. After everything Walter and I had shared, after our bond that I thought unbreakable, this public rejection felt like a physical blow. "I guess we know who the real family was now," my mother said, patting my father's arm triumphantly. I sat frozen, unable to process what was happening. Had I misunderstood our relationship so completely? Had Walter's final lucid words, "Remember what matters," been some kind of warning rather than wisdom? Just as I was considering how to exit with whatever dignity I could salvage, Hamilton cleared his throat loudly, cutting through the murmurs and chuckles. "If I may continue," he said sharply, his tone suddenly stern. "There is an additional provision regarding Caleb Reynolds." The room quieted immediately. "Walter has left a sealed letter to be read privately to Caleb, along with additional instructions that can only be disclosed following that private reading." My father's smile faltered. "What additional instructions?" "As stated, That information can only be disclosed after Mr. Reynolds and I have a private conversation, Hamilton replied firmly. If the rest of you would please wait here, Caleb and I will return shortly. In the sudden, confused silence, I stood on unsteady legs and followed Hamilton from the room. As the door closed behind us, I heard the buzz of speculation erupt. Lawrence Hamilton led me down a corridor to a smaller office, furnished simply but elegantly. He closed the door and indicated I should sit in one of two leather armchairs positioned before a window overlooking the Boston skyline. Caleb, he said, his formal demeanor softening, before I share Walter's letter, I want you to know that he agonized over this plan. He was concerned about the pain it might cause you, even momentarily. What plan? I asked, my voice barely steady. Why would he humiliate me like that? Hamilton opened his briefcase and removed an envelope sealed with wax bearing Walter's monogram. I think his words will explain better than mine could. He handed me the envelope and respectfully turned to look out the window, giving me privacy to read. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded several pages covered in Walter's distinctive handwriting, strong downstrokes, perfectly level lines, even without paper guides. I began to read. My dear Caleb, if you're reading this, then I've gone ahead on the final journey we all must take, and you're sitting in Lawrence's office, probably feeling confused and hurt. For that temporary pain, I am deeply sorry, but I hope what follows will help you understand. During my illness, I had the rare opportunity that few are granted to see clearly who people are when they believe there is something to gain from you. I watched as family members who had barely spared me a thought suddenly became attentive, interested in my comfort only as a means to an end. All except you, my boy. You were the same person throughout, caring, genuine, present not for what you might receive but for what you could give. Your time, your companionship, your willingness to simply sit with me in silence when words became too difficult. I realized that I faced a problem many wealthy individuals confront: how to ensure that my legacy serves those who deserve it, rather than those who merely expect it. How to protect you, specifically, from the burden of sudden wealth without preparation, and from the circling vultures who would see you as a means to access that wealth. The public reading of the will was a test, not for you, but for them. I needed to create a situation where everyone would reveal their true character. Lawrence tells me your parents have been openly speculating about their inheritance plans for months. I expect their behavior at the reading confirmed what I already knew. Now, to the truth. Contrary to what was stated publicly, I am leaving you the following. 1. The primary family estate in Vermont, including all structures, land, and contents. 2. My controlling interest, 61%, in Reynolds Sustainable Development. 3. A trust fund of $20 million to be managed by Hamilton and Associates with disbursements structured to support both your personal needs and the philanthropic work you've shown such passion for. So, all personal items not specifically bequeathed to others, including my journals, photographs, and the items from our time together that I know hold sentimental value for you. There are conditions, not because I don't trust you, but because I want to protect you. The company shares come with a 5-year provision requiring you to work with a management team I've selected, good people who share our values and who can guide you through the learning curve of running a large corporation. The trust is structured to provide both income and capital for worthy projects, with Lawrence serving as co-trustee until you reach 35. I've arranged for business and financial mentors to be available to you, people I trust who can advise without controlling. Caleb, this wealth is a tool, not a measure of your worth. Use it as you've used everything else in your life, with integrity, compassion, and vision. Continue the work you believe in, but now with resources that can expand its impact. As for the family, they've received exactly what I believe they deserve: comfortable provisions without control of the company or its direction. They may contest the will, but Lawrence has prepared for this contingency. Any contest will result in their portions being redirected to charity. I am prouder of you than I can express. Not because of what you've achieved, but because of who you've become. A man who understands that what matters in this world isn't what you have, but what you do with it, and how you treat people along the way. Remember what matters. With all my love, Walter. I read the letter twice before looking up at Hamilton, who had turned back from the window and was watching me with kind eyes. Is this real? I finally managed. Every word, Hamilton confirmed. Walter updated his will shortly after his diagnosis. The public reading today was part of his strategy to, as he put it, let people show who they truly are when they believe they've won. So the dollar, a misdirection. The family received what Walter intended them to have, generous provisions by any standard, but not control of his primary assets or company. That control, along with the bulk of his estate, passes to you. Hamilton opened a folder and spread several documents before me. Here are the actual provisions. Reynolds Sustainable Development, which your parents believed would be split among various family members, remains intact under your majority control. The Vermont property, which your father has apparently been discussing converting to a corporate retreat, remains private family land, as Walter intended. They're going to fight this, I said, thinking of the explosion that awaited us in the conference room. They may try, Hamilton acknowledged, but Walter was thorough. Every provision has been legally vetted. Additionally, there's a contest clause that stipulates any legal challenge results in the challenger's share being redirected to environmental charities. Walter called it his scorched earth policy. If they fight, they lose everything. He gave me a moment to process this information before continuing. There's one more thing Walter wanted me to tell you. He said, tell Caleb that this isn't about punishing the others. It's about protecting what matters, the company's integrity, the land's future, and most importantly, Caleb himself. What happens now? I asked, still trying to absorb everything. Now, if you're ready, we return to the conference room, where I'll announce the full provisions of the will. You don't need to say anything unless you want to. This moment may be difficult, but Walter believed it was necessary. I took a deep breath, folded my grandfather's letter, and placed it carefully in my inside jacket pocket, close to my heart. I'm ready, I said, and was surprised to find it was true. We walked back to the conference room where my family waited, their faces a mixture of curiosity and concern. As Hamilton reopened the door, I caught my father mid-sentence. Obviously senile at the end. We can contest on those grounds if necessary. All eyes turned to us as we entered. Hamilton resumed his place at the head of the table while I returned to my seat, now seeing the dollar bill still sitting there from an entirely different perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, Hamilton began, his voice carrying that same authority but now with an edge of something else, perhaps satisfaction. I will now disclose the remaining provisions of Walter Reynolds' will, which constitute the primary distribution of his estate. The conference room erupted into chaos the moment Lawrence Hamilton finished reading the actual provisions of Walter's will. My father shot to his feet, his face flushing deep red from collar to hairline. "This is preposterous," he shouted. Walter was not in his right mind. "We'll contest this immediately." Uncle Robert joined in, his voice overlapping with my father's. The medication affected his judgment. There's no way he intended to leave the company too. He couldn't bring himself to gesture at me directly. My mother's reaction was subtler but equally revealing. She sat frozen, her social smile still fixed in place but now resembling a grimace, her knuckles white where she gripped her designer purse. Aunt Melissa was already on her phone, presumably calling their family attorney, while my cousins exchanged shocked glances that quickly transformed into calculated consideration as they reassessed my position in their world. Throughout the uproar, I remained seated, my grandfather's letter a tangible weight against my chest. I felt oddly calm, as though Walter's words had created a protective barrier around me. Hamilton raised his hands for silence. Mr. Reynolds anticipated the possibility of a contest. He stated clearly, "I am required to inform you that any legal challenge to these provisions will trigger the contest clause, resulting in the challenger's share being redirected in its entirety to the Environmental Defense Fund." "You can't be serious," my father sputtered, though uncertainty had crept into his anger. "Completely serious," Hamilton confirmed. "The clause has been thoroughly reviewed by our litigation team and will withstand challenge. Additionally, all medical documentation confirming Walter's competence has been filed with the court, including evaluations from 2 independent psychiatrists conducted the same day this will was signed." My father sank back into his chair, legal threats transforming into damage control before my eyes. "There's clearly been a misunderstanding," he said, his businessman's smile emerging. "No one's talking about contesting anything. We're just surprised." Hamilton gathered his papers. "The full documentation will be provided to each of you. Caleb, we should schedule a meeting to discuss transition details for the company and estate management." As people began to collect themselves, my mother made the first move in what I would come to recognize as the family's new strategy. She approached me with open arms. "Caleb, darling, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "What a wonderful tribute to your special relationship with Walter. We're so proud of you." I stepped back from her embrace. "I need some air," I said simply, and headed for the door. "We'll talk later, son," my father called after me. "Family dinner tonight to celebrate?" I didn't respond, just kept walking. Instead of taking the elevator where I'd be trapped with family members, I pushed through the door to the emergency stairs and descended 15 floors, the rhythmic movement helping to clear my head. Outside on the street, the summer heat hit me like a physical barrier. I loosened my tie, took a deep breath of city air, and pulled out my phone. With shaking fingers that belied my outward calm, I called my best friend Marcus. "It's done," I said when he answered. And it was. Not what anyone expected. "You okay?" he asked immediately, concern evident in his voice. "Need me to come get you? Can you meet me at Blackbird Coffee, the one near the public garden? I just need to sit somewhere normal for a while." On my way. 20 minutes. I walked the 6 blocks to the coffee shop, using the movement to process the seismic shift that had just occurred in my life. Pedestrians passed by, unaware that the man in the navy suit had just inherited control of a multi-million-dollar company and estate. The normalcy of the street scene was grounding. By the time I reached Blackbird Coffee, my phone had begun to explode with notifications. I silenced it without looking and ordered a black coffee, taking a seat in the corner with my back to the wall. When Marcus arrived, he took one look at my face and ordered us both sandwiches before joining me. "That bad?" he asked. "That's surreal," I corrected, and proceeded to explain everything: the public reading, the humiliation, the private letter, the true inheritance, and the family's rapid recalculation. "Your grandfather," Marcus said when I finished, "was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. That's some next-level planning." "I'm still trying to wrap my head around it," I admitted. "Yesterday I was just me, nonprofit architect with a modest life. Today I'm, what? Company owner? Millionaire? I don't even know how to process this." "You're still you," Marcus said firmly. "Just you with more resources and responsibilities, and probably more annoying relatives." As if on cue, my phone lit up again. I finally glanced at the screen to see dozens of missed calls and messages from family members. I scrolled through them briefly. From Mom, "Darling, please call us. We're worried about you." From Dad, "Son, we have some exciting ideas to discuss about the company's future." From Brittany, "Cuz, oh my God, let's grab drinks and talk about collaborating. My lifestyle brand and your new eco company would be perfect partners." From Uncle Robert, "Caleb, concerning about your lack of experience. Let's discuss transition plan. Family first." "They're circling already," I said, showing Marcus the messages. "Not one of them acknowledges how they behaved earlier. It's like it never happened." "What are you going to do?" Marcus asked. "Right now, finish this coffee, go home and lock my door. Tomorrow I'll meet with Hamilton again to understand exactly what I'm dealing with." I kept to that plan, returning to my apartment by mid-afternoon. But as I approached my building, I spotted my parents' luxury SUV parked out front. They were sitting inside, clearly waiting for me. When they saw me, they emerged with practiced smiles. "Caleb," my mother called, waving as though we were meeting for a pleasant lunch rather than an ambush. "We've been so worried." I stopped on the sidewalk, unwilling to invite them up to my private space. "What are you doing here?" "We wanted to make sure you were okay," my father said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "It's been quite a day for all of us. Especially you," my mother added with a sympathetic head tilt that had never preceded anything genuine in my experience. "I'm fine," I said. "I'd like to be alone now." Of course," my father nodded. "But we should really discuss next steps. The company board will need reassurance about leadership continuity. I'm thinking a joint announcement, you and me together, showing a united family front." "The lawyers said something about a management team Walter selected," I replied. "I'll be working with them." My father's smile tightened. "Those are just advisors, son. Family should lead family businesses. Your mother and I have been running East Coast operations for 20 years. We have the experience you need." "The same experience that made grandfather decide to structure his will this way?" I asked quietly. My mother stepped forward quickly. "Darling, your grandfather was confused at the end. Medication, pain, it affected his judgment. He always intended for your father to lead the company after him. This detour was just his illness speaking." "That's not what his letter said," I replied. my hand instinctively touching my jacket where the letter rested. Letters can be misinterpreted, my father said smoothly. Walter and I had many private conversations about succession planning. I can guide you through what he really wanted. I felt something shift inside me, a lifetime of seeking their approval, giving way to a clarity that must have come from Walter himself. No, I said simply. I'm going to honor his actual wishes, not your interpretation of them. My mother's facade cracked slightly. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By shutting us out? What exactly have you done for me? I asked, genuinely curious about her perception. We raised you, she exclaimed, provided for you, gave you every advantage. Walter paid for my education, I reminded her. And you've made it clear for years that you consider my career choices a disappointment. What you're actually upset about is losing access to control and money, not being shut out of my life. How dare you speak to your mother that way, my father growled, the friendly mask slipping entirely. This isn't over. That company belongs in experienced hands. Your grandfather's senility doesn't change that. It's exactly that attitude that led to his decisions, I said, suddenly understanding Walter's choices with perfect clarity. You saw him as a means to wealth. He saw through it. You ungrateful little, my father began, but my mother grabbed his arm. Arthur, not here, she hissed, glancing at neighbors who had begun to notice the confrontation. I used the moment to step around them toward my building entrance. I'm going inside now. Please don't wait for me. We can speak through the lawyers if necessary. Caleb, my mother called after me, her voice rising with genuine alarm now. Don't do this. We're family. I turned back one last time. Yes, we are. And that should have meant something more than what you've made it mean. I entered my building without looking back, climbed the stairs to my third-floor apartment, and locked the door behind me. Then I did something I hadn't allowed myself to do since Walter's death. I sat down on my worn couch and wept, not from grief this time, but from the complex mixture of validation, responsibility, and freedom that came from finally seeing the truth. The week following the will reading was a crash course in the realities of managing substantial wealth and corporate responsibilities. Lawrence Hamilton arranged daily meetings to walk me through what I'd inherited and the structures Walter had put in place to support me. Walter was exceptionally thorough, Hamilton explained during our first session. He didn't just plan the distribution of assets, he created an entire transition framework. The framework included a management team comprised of Walter's most trusted executives, people who shared his vision for sustainable development and ethical business practices. Janet Chen, the company's longtime CFO, had been appointed interim CEO until I was ready to step into a leadership role. Walter had also arranged for mentors in business management, finance, and philanthropy to guide me through the learning curve. He didn't expect you to know how to run a corporation overnight, Hamilton explained, but he believed in your judgment and your ability to learn. As I reviewed the documents detailing Walter's holdings, I began to understand the magnitude of what he had entrusted to me. Reynolds Sustainable Development had projects in 12 states, employed over 500 people, and maintained partnerships with environmental organizations worldwide. The responsibility was daunting. I don't know if I can do this, I admitted to Hamilton during our third meeting. My background is in architectural design, not corporate leadership. Walter knew that, Hamilton replied. He also knew you share his values and vision. He used to say that skills can be learned, but integrity must be intrinsic. The trust fund Walter had established was equally thoughtful in its structure. Rather than giving me unfettered access to millions, he had created a graduated system that provided a comfortable income while encouraging both philanthropy and education. There were specific allocations for continuing my work in affordable housing design, supporting environmental causes, and funding my own ongoing education in business and environmental science. He wanted to protect you from both external pressure and the potential pitfalls of sudden wealth, Hamilton explained. The structure builds in time to adjust. Between these meetings, I faced a barrage of communications from family members. My parents alternated between thinly veiled threats of legal action and attempts at reconciliation. My father sent lengthy emails outlining his vision for our company's future, while my mother left tearful voicemails about family loyalty. I responded minimally, maintaining firm boundaries while avoiding outright hostility. 2 weeks after the will reading, I finally felt ready to visit the Vermont estate. I drove up early on a Saturday morning, the familiar route bringing back memories of childhood summers and recent visits during Walter's illness. As I turned onto the tree-lined drive leading to the main house, something inside me shifted, This wasn't just grandfather's home anymore. It was my responsibility. Maria and George met me at the front door, their welcome genuine and tinged with shared grief. They had been caretakers of the property for most of my life and knew every inch of the 200-acre estate. "We've kept everything just as he left it," Maria said as she led me through the house, especially his study. "We thought you might want to go through his papers yourself." Walter's study was exactly as I remembered. Walls lined with books, the massive oak desk positioned to catch the morning light, photographs of the two of us scattered among business awards and family pictures. I ran my fingers along the spines of his books, breathing in the familiar scent of leather bindings and the faint trace of pipe tobacco. In the desk drawers, I found Walter's business journals, decades of careful observations, decisions, and reflections on the company he had built. The earliest entries dated back to 1973, handwritten in the same strong script as his letter to me. These journals represented a masterclass in ethical business leadership, one that Walter had intended for me all along. That night, I slept in the room that had been mine during childhood visits, the twin bed now too small for my adult frame, but comforting in its familiarity. Looking up at the same ceiling I had stared at as a boy, dreaming of building things that would last, I felt Walter's presence more strongly than I had since his death. "I'm trying," I whispered to the quiet room. "I'll figure this out." The following week brought my first board meeting at Reynolds Sustainable Development Headquarters in Burlington. Janet Chen had prepared me as best she could, but nothing could fully ready me for the skepticism radiating from certain board members, particularly those who had been close to my parents. "With all due respect to Walter's wishes," said Richard Harmon, head of East Coast Development, "we're facing critical decisions about the Phillips project. We need experienced leadership, not, well, no offense, but you're an architect with a nonprofit background." Before I could respond, Janet intervened. "Walter left specific instructions about the Phillips project," she said, sliding a folder toward Harmon. "He had concerns about its environmental impact and commissioned an independent assessment. The results are troubling. The assessment revealed that the Phillips project, a major commercial development my parents had been pushing for, would significantly damage local wetlands, despite assurances to the contrary from the environmental compliance team. The documentation included emails showing my father had been aware of these issues but had instructed staff to find workarounds. "My first decision as majority shareholder," I said, finding my voice, "is to suspend the Phillips project pending a complete redesign that prioritizes environmental integrity. If that's not possible, we'll withdraw entirely." The room fell silent. I had just effectively canceled a $50 million project that had been my father's pet initiative. It wasn't a decision I had planned to make that day, but seeing the evidence of corners being cut, exactly what Walter had always stood against, made the choice clear. "Walter would have done the same," Janet said quietly, a small smile of approval crossing her face. Over the following months, I established a rhythm between my apartment in the city, the Vermont estate, and the company headquarters. I continued my work with the nonprofit on a part-time basis, unwilling to abandon projects I had committed to. Meanwhile, I immersed myself in learning the business Walter had built, guided by his journals and the team he had assembled to support me. The most significant change was in how I handled family relationships. Through Walter's attorney, I established clear boundaries. Any communication about business matters would go through proper channels. Any attempt to circumvent the will's provisions would result in invoking the contest clause. Personal relationships would be conditional on respect for these boundaries. My parents tested these limits repeatedly. My father attempted to schedule meetings with key clients without authorization. My mother showed up unannounced at the Vermont estate, only to be politely but firmly turned away by George. Uncle Robert tried to access company financial records through old contacts in accounting. Each breach was addressed calmly but decisively. "I'm not cutting them off," I explained to Hamilton during one particularly difficult week. "I'm just requiring that they engage with me honestly, not as a means to an end." As the dust began to settle, I received an unexpected package from Hamilton. "Walter left instructions for this to be delivered to you 3 months after the will reading," he explained. Inside was a set of letters Walter had written during his final months, each sealed and labeled with specific milestone events. "Open on your first major business decision. Open when you feel overwhelmed. Open when the family pressure becomes too much. Open on the anniversary of my passing." The letter labeled "Open when you feel ready to move forward" seemed appropriate for that moment. Inside, Walter had written, "Caleb, by now, you've likely begun to find your footing in this new reality. The initial shock has passed, and you're facing both the weight and the potential of what I've entrusted to you. Remember that wealth is just a magnifier. It makes it easier to be who you already are. It doesn't change your core unless you allow it to. The quiet strength I've always seen in you, the integrity that guided your choices, even when they were difficult, those qualities will serve you well now. You may be wondering if I placed too heavy a burden on your shoulders. I didn't make this decision lightly. I watched you grow, learn, stumble, and rise again. I saw how you treated people regardless of what they could do for you. I observed your commitment to creating something meaningful rather than merely profitable. These are the qualities of true leadership, not the domineering approach your father mistakes for strength, nor the social maneuvering your mother confuses with connection. My hope is not that you will preserve what I built exactly as it was, but that you will transform it according to your own vision while maintaining the principles at its foundation. Change what needs changing. Grow what deserves growth. Let go of what no longer serves the greater good. And remember that the greatest wealth is in the life you build, the people you love, and the difference you make, not in the assets you control. With confidence in the man you are, Walter. I folded the letter carefully and added it to the others I kept in a wooden box that Walter and I had built together one summer. Then I opened my laptop and began drafting plans for the Walter Reynolds Foundation for Sustainable Housing, the first initiative that would truly bring together my background and the resources Walter had entrusted to me. For the first time since receiving my inheritance, I felt not just the responsibility, but the possibility of what lay ahead. 1 year after the will reading, I stood on the porch of the Vermont estate, watching the sunrise with a cup of coffee, a morning ritual I had inherited from Walter along with everything else. The property looked different now. Solar panels gleamed on the southern roof slopes, and the gardens had been expanded to include community vegetable plots tended by local families. Inside, the house remained largely as Walter had left it, though I had converted one wing into offices for the Walter Reynolds Foundation, which had become my primary focus over the past year. The foundation specialized in developing sustainable, affordable housing models that could be implemented nationwide. We had already broken ground on 3 pilot communities, with plans for 7 more in development. My life had found a new rhythm, 3 days a week at Reynolds Sustainable Development Headquarters working with Janet Chen, who continued as CEO while I served as chairman, 2 days at the foundation offices, weekends split between my city apartment and the estate. It wasn't the life I had imagined for myself, but it had become one I valued deeply. The most profound changes weren't in my schedule or responsibilities, but in my understanding of myself and the relationships around me. Weekly therapy sessions had helped me recognize patterns from childhood, the constant seeking of approval, the internalized criticism, the belief that I had to earn love through achievement or compliance. Walter's unconditional support had been the counter to these patterns, and in his absence, I was learning to provide that validation for myself. My social circle had shifted significantly. Some friends had drifted away, uncomfortable with my changed circumstances, or unsure how to relate to me. Others had revealed themselves as opportunists, suddenly interested in my company and connections. But my core relationships, with Marcus, Rachel, and a few others, had deepened, grounded in the same authentic connection that had always defined them. New friendships had emerged as well, particularly with Janet and other members of Walter's leadership team, who shared my commitment to continuing his ethical approach to business. These relationships were refreshingly straightforward, based on shared values and mutual respect rather than obligation or advantage. My family situation had evolved in ways both expected and surprising. My parents had indeed attempted a legal challenge to the will, despite the contest clause. Their attorney had advised against it, but they had been convinced they could prove Walter's undue influence on his medical team to falsify competency evaluations. The challenge failed spectacularly, with the judge not only upholding the will, but publicly reprimanding them for wasting the court's time with frivolous claims. Faced with the prospect of losing everything under the contest clause, they had withdrawn the suit and retreated to regroup. 6 months of silence followed, during which I focused on building my new life without the constant drain of their manipulation attempts. Then, 3 months ago, my mother had reached out with what appeared to be a genuine attempt at reconciliation. "I've been seeing a therapist," she admitted during a carefully arranged coffee meeting on neutral ground. "She's helping me understand some difficult truths about myself and how I've treated you. I remained cautious, but open to the possibility of change. We established a limited, conditional relationship. Monthly lunches, no discussion of business matters, no attempts to leverage our connection for access or advantage. My father, still unable to accept the new reality, refused to participate in these tentative peace talks. He'll come around or he won't, my mother said, with unexpected insight. That's his journey, not yours or mine. The rest of the family had sorted themselves into categories based on their responses to the changed power dynamic. Uncle Robert and Aunt Melissa maintained a cold distance, occasionally sending performatively polite holiday cards but otherwise avoiding contact. Cousin Brittany, ever the pragmatist, had adjusted her approach and now maintained a cordial, if not close relationship that carefully avoided mentions of collaboration opportunities. Cousin Marcus had surprisingly become an ally of sorts, breaking from his father's influence to work with our environmental compliance team, where his financial background proved genuinely useful. On the professional front, Reynolds' sustainable development had weathered the transition with remarkable stability. Walter's careful planning had included preparing key executives for the change, ensuring that daily operations continued smoothly while I found my footing. The company's commitment to environmental and social responsibility had deepened under my influence, with new initiatives in affordable housing, renewable energy infrastructure, and community development. The Walter Reynolds Foundation had become my personal passion, a way to honor both Walter's legacy and my own values. The foundation's first major project, a net-zero energy affordable housing community in Burlington, was nearing completion. Future residents included teachers, healthcare workers, and young families who would otherwise be priced out of the area. Exactly the type of impact I had always wanted to create, now possible on a scale I had never imagined. What surprised me most about inheriting wealth was not how much it changed my circumstances, but how little it changed who I was at my core. The same values that had drawn me to nonprofit work, sustainability, accessibility, community, now guided my decisions in managing substantial resources. The difference wasn't in the principles but in the potential impact. Walter had understood this better than anyone. Among his personal effects, I had found journals dating back decades, including entries about me from childhood. Watched Caleb today, helping Maria's grandson learn to fish, one entry read. He has that rare quality. Success matters less to him than whether he's achieved it honorably. Can't teach that. Can only recognize and nurture it. Each morning, I still read Walter's letters, sometimes one I'd read before, sometimes opening a new one when I faced a milestone he had anticipated. They formed a continuing conversation, a bridge between his wisdom and my evolving experience. The letter labeled, "For your darkest moments of doubt had been particularly meaningful during the legal battle with my parents. Doubt is not weakness, Caleb. It's the necessary counterbalance to conviction. Without it, conviction becomes rigidity. What matters is not the absence of doubt, but the courage to act thoughtfully despite it. Trust the compass of your values more than the weather vane of others' opinions." The dollar bill from the will reading remained framed on my desk, not as a reminder of that moment of humiliation, but as a symbol of what Walter had truly valued. Next to it stood a simple wooden box we had built together when I was 12, now holding the collection of his letters. These items were worth more to me than any of the material wealth I had inherited. As I finished my coffee, watching the Vermont hills emerge from morning mist, I reflected on the true nature of Walter's gift. It wasn't the estate, the company, or even the financial security. It was the lesson that wealth, properly understood, is not what you have, but what you do with what you have. That relationships built on genuine connection outlast those built on utility or advantage. That a legacy isn't measured in dollars, but in impact and in lives touched. I had entered that will reading a year ago believing I knew what mattered. I had left it temporarily shaken but ultimately strengthened in that conviction. Walter's final lesson, the orchestrated revelation of my family's true colors and my own capacity to stand firm in my values, was perhaps his greatest gift of all. As I prepare to face whatever comes next, I carry Walter's wisdom with me. Remember what matters, not things, not status, people, truth, how you make others feel. In a world that often measures worth by possessions and power, I choose to measure it by purpose and integrity instead. That's the inheritance I value most. What about you? Has someone in your life taught you what truly matters beyond material success? Have you ever discovered someone's true character in a moment of crisis? Share your experiences in the comments below, And don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Sometimes life's most important lessons come wrapped in unexpected packages, just like my $1 inheritance that turned out to be priceless.